globally. But we'll begin today with, well, Tony Radakin, our now ex Chief of the Defence Staff. What a man.
This is correct, and I suppose I should apologise to the audience because it's a bit like putting Tony Blair up on screen. But of course, this is the man of the moment. I just wanted to recap. The BBC's now grabbing him because he's out of the job. And we want to do some analysis on his comments. But first of all, this is a Telegraph article. I think this is 2021, where it says, Tony Radakin, the state school educated boy, that's an appropriate word, from Oldham, who has, quote, changed how the Navy works. Now, we've already covered this in other UK column news editions, and that is that, of course, the RN's suffering absolutely critical breakdown, shortage of ships, and the ships that they've got, many of them can't go to sea, and yet that this man is being praised and feted as effectively the man who's been running the war in Ukraine single-handedly in his very clean combat gear.
So he changed how the Navy works by making it not work anymore?
That is how it appears to me, or at least if we say, well, it wasn't all his fault that the Navy wasn't working. When he was in the most powerful position, did he focus on the Navy and getting it working? Absolutely not, because he's been parading on the international stage in his combat gear, supposedly making out that he knows how to run a war on the scale that's going on in Ukraine.
What did he do to get those medals, Brian?
I do know he's been in a job where he's been interfacing with the right people. And of course, it's widely rumoured that his friendship with Boris Johnson helped him actually get into the senior post itself. So I'm going to say in the right place at the right time, and then you get the medals, because clearly he's never put his life on the line in a combat zone.
So he didn't get them from the charity shop then?
Possibly.
Okay.
Let's have a look at this short interview with the BBC, and we're going to make quite a long comment on it.
This war has been a disaster for Russia. Putin wanted less NATO, he's got more NATO. We've grown from 30 nations to 32 nations. Putin originally thought that he would subjugate Ukraine in days, if not weeks. That's clearly not the case. It's a facile description, but it's a really important one. If a snail had left Rostov-on-Don in Russia on the 24th of February 2022, by now it would have crossed all the way through Ukraine and it will be halfway through Poland. That's how difficult Russia is finding it just to get those 4 oblasts. If Russia carries on at the pace that it currently is, it will take it 4.4 years to get the remaining territory in those 4 oblasts. And having lost 1 million people killed and wounded, it will lose a further 2 million people killed and wounded. So this is about Ukraine's bravery, Ukraine's courage, our support to Ukraine to keep them in the fight.
I find this absolutely shocking, Mike. This man is puerile. He's also not giving the public the truth. Maybe he doesn't know. But essentially, these little stories, we've shown previous video clips of him playing with coloured pencils and maps on the wall. Apparently, this gets him very excited to do with the trade routes around the globe. And now he's talking about snails. This man is not in the real world. But let's just pop a little bit of hard comment up on screen, because this is where he started off in the interview. This war has been a disaster for Russia. Putin wanted less NATO. He has got more NATO. Well, of course, the reality is somewhat different. We've got NATO that's a complete broken mess at the moment. So the UK and the EU component are begging for continued US support and commitment, because the truth has always been that without the Americans, there's no effective NATO. And this is freely available. This fact is freely available if you look at comment in the UK and the American and the Western press. So this is pure propaganda that he's pointing at, that he's starting with. But let's have a look at, in a bit more detail, at key points. And as I just said, there's quite a few of these, but I think it's worth going through in some detail. So At no stage did Russia declare or plan for an invasion, a full invasion of Ukraine, with a view to occupying the whole country in days or weeks. This is a comment that's been made by the West, which Radakin is repeating. There is absolutely no substance for it. And of course, basic evidence is that the size of Ukraine indicates that this was never the case. So if we just put that one across, Mike, thank you. Ukraine is a vast landmass, average size, depending on what source you go to, 603,000 square kilometers. And in 2022, Russia simply did not have the troops to fully invade Ukraine. So it's nonsense to state this. And the Russians didn't, in contrast, the Russians did state and actually enact the objective of military intervention into Ukraine to demonstrate its intent to counter Ukraine attacks on Russian-speaking people in the Donbass and the continued NATO plans to integrate Ukraine into NATO itself. And of course, it was Boris Johnson who was one of the key figures that disrupted the peace discussions in Istanbul in order to make sure that this war continued. So, of course, Radakin doesn't want to tell the public about any of these things. If we go on, Russia has successfully mobilized what was a small defensive Western army, because, of course, remember that Russia has to deal with its western borders and its eastern borders. That army, 220,000, now increased to what many believe is around 800,000. It's done all this while fighting the war in Ukraine, which is not against the Ukrainians, because, of course, it's a war that's backed fully by the US, the EU, NATO, etc. This is a tremendous achievement in its own right. And if we go on through this, we've got that Russia has already defeated 2 Western trained and equipped Ukrainian armies and defeated a major Western-backed Ukrainian offensive. This is all factual information that I'm giving you. And for people who do their own research, you will be able to find this quite easily. Much of it has been reported in Western press and UK press itself, but of course, much of it hidden in plain sight. We'll also say that Russia has taken control of 20% of Ukraine. That equates to about 500,000 square kilometres, and that equates to 50% of the total land area of UK. Plus, they're gaining ground every day. So this is on a vast, vast scale. The West hasn't seen warfare like this really since the Second World War, possibly the Korean War. But what the Russians have been doing on the ground is truly remarkable. Now, we will go on to say that Russia has continued to outproduce the Ukraine, US, UK, EU and NATO in shells, bombs, missiles and other munitions, beg your pardon. And the claims that were made, including, I believe, by Radakin himself, that Russia was going to run short of munitions, this never materialized because basically they were untrue. And then we've got the technology that the Russians are employing on the battlefield. So we've got new missile systems, including hypersonic missiles, and the West has no defense against these missiles whatsoever. And of course, the failings of the UK, the West, and indeed the US military system to develop these systems themselves and the countermeasures means that there's a lot of absolutely false threats coming out of the West because they cannot deal with the technology that Russia is operating with on the ground. Now, if we come on a slightly different area of weapon systems themselves, Russia at the moment is using high numbers of highly accurate aviation dropped heavy glide bombs. That's up to 3,000 kilograms worth of bombs being used in vast numbers. And these weapons are being used to successfully destroy the Ukrainian front line. So Ukrainian troops are being killed by blast in their bunkers or underground command shelters. They have no defense against what's being used against them. And if they assemble troops in numbers, the Russians are taking out those troop assembly points with either missiles or these very heavy bombs. So this is the reality, which is very different from what Radakin is trying to tell us. And if we add to that, of course, Russia has developed highly accurate drones for not only wide battlefield surveillance, but also coordinated strategic attacks across Ukraine, both eastern Ukraine and western Ukraine. And again, the majority of these attacks absolutely getting through Ukrainians' largely Western provided missile defences. So failure on the ground at every stage, in direct contrast to these wild and puerile claims that Radakin has been making. And in addition, we can go on because Russia has developed the ability to completely restructure its approach to warfare in a battlefield which is totally dominated by surveillance, not only by long-range surveillance by the US and the UK in particular, but also satellite surveillance and then local surveillance by drones on the ground. Despite all of this, which makes it very difficult for even individual soldiers or small groups of soldiers to move, Russia has still been moving forward. And we've got to recognise that there has been an impressive use of command and control and coordination. That's the C3 between the Russian troops on the ground, plus information from drones. And this has been backed by heavy weapons support, which does include long-range artillery, but it also includes the glide bombs and tactical missiles. This is a new form of warfare that Russia has been dragged into. And at the moment, Russia is clearly demonstrating that they can fight this type of warfare and win not only against Ukraine, but also NATO itself.
I noticed you've said on there, this is new warfare, but we were told by Radakin, by his predecessor, Nick Carter, and the people around the Joint Chiefs, that new warfare was going to be all about cyber and space. This is a complete misreading of the reality.
A complete misreading, Mike. And of course, the thing is now that the Russians have many, many thousands of extremely highly trained and experienced. These are hardened battlefield troops in this type of warfare. So the idea that the West has the ability to step in and fight the Russians is actually laughable at the moment. So where do we go from this? Let's move on through, because Russia's ability to win on the battlefield has also been completely unaffected by the hyped Western wonder weapons which we had. So we had the Abrams, Challenger and Leopard tanks, Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, these very expensive units, millions of dollars each. These have been destroyed in huge numbers by very cheap Russian attack drones. And of course, the F-16s, which we heard week after week after week, were going to change the whole battle. These barely got into the air before they were destroyed, the few that did fly, and others were destroyed on the ground. So huge propaganda from the West. And
I think we said that was going to happen.
Absolutely, I did, Mike, yeah. So let's have a look at this. Russia has demonstrated highly capable battlefield command and control. And the other thing it's done is shown the ability to give troops in platoon concentrations, maybe 10 men, the ability to call in fire support, not only from aviation units, but also from these long-range missile defense systems. This, again, is a unique change on the battlefield, that you're giving trust for individual soldiers or groups of soldiers that they are going to use these very impressive weapon systems from long range to do the job, maybe even a few hundred meters in front of them. Now, at the same time, we've been seeing more reports that the Ukrainians have been uneasy at the advice being given by what's clearly on-the-ground US-UK weapons teams. There have been a number of reports, certainly in Ukrainian press, Kiev Independent or the Kiev Post, for example, showing that the Ukrainians have had less and less trust in the ability of the West to advise on the war. And if we go on through, this is where it gets really serious, because, of course, the West greatly underestimated Russia's ability to absorb battlefield casualties. If you're dealing in up to 30 million military and civilian casualties for Russia in the Second World War, Russia knows how to play with battlefield casualties. The US still frightened of its 58,000 people killed in Vietnam. And the Radakin and the West simply dare not talk about the Ukrainian casualties. Now, on that subject, we've got Radakin talking about 1 million plus casualties on the Russian side. BBC Media Zona, if we choose that report, is talking about 220,000 Russian dead to August 2025. But all of the measured battlefield analysis demonstrates that Ukrainian casualties are 2 to 3 times this figure, with an even higher proportion of injured due to these weapon systems that the Russians are using, which I've just described. So if we get to the end of this, basically we've got the US and EU sanctions on Russia as a strategic weapon. Those have failed. And we've also got the bizarre situation that through this war, the EU has continued to take Russian oil. And the statistics here that I've chosen to bring up is that Russia earned some 233 billion from fuel exports to the European Union in the 3 years from the invasion until early 2025. And The Guardian itself reports that from February 2024 to February 2025, EU imports of Russian oil and gas were valued at 21.9 billion euros. So rank hypocrisy that they are doing something to actually sanction Russia, while we've got the European Union still feeding off these supplies. So I'll end the segment by saying that essentially just hypocrisy, what this man is talking about, Ukraine's bravery and courage. We are supporting them to keep the fight going. The reality is this is a proxy war which is going to be fought to the last Ukrainian, and Radakin and his colleagues are never going to put themselves in harm's way. So I've been quite hard on this man, and I think it's appropriate. Shortly before he retired, he was here speaking on the streets in Kiev and saying what a job he was doing effectively for peace. But we know it's not going well. And even on the American side with Vance here, that he's talking about pretty strained relationships with the Ukrainians. So overall, Mike, utter lies coming out of the UK government and the Ministry of Defence. And if we take an objective view of the war in Ukraine, at the moment is no doubt that Russia has the upper hand, which is why, of course, they don't want the fighting to stop.
To follow on from that,